Hi guys, welcome to Corona Specific Series by LDFS. I'm Dr. Lakshmy. In my earlier video, we had a discussion about what is an emergency fund. We tried to understand it better. We tried to understand what liquid funds are and all those things. I hope you have watched that video so that you can understand this video better. If you haven't watched that, the link is there in the description below. Kindly like and subscribe to our channel and share to maximum people so that we can help as many dentists as possible, especially juniors who have just started the clinic or are planning to start a clinic who will get maximum benefit from these videos. Thank you so much in advance. In today's video, we will be discussing about why do we need an emergency fund and what are the pros and cons of having an emergency fund. Let's discuss about that in detail in this video today. During the nationwide lockdown 2020, many of the small businesses like us have faced this issue and they understood the benefit of having an emergency fund. In fact, many of us must have faced that. They needed emergency fund so as to survive these tough times and stay in business in spite of being partially or completely closed. Now, many of us might think that I have kept aside around a big chunk of money for my personal and professional expenses. So I can use that money. What is the actual, why is it required? Why is the emergency fund required? If I have kept aside some money for my personal expenses and my family expenses and also my clinic, then why should I have a separate emergency fund for the clinic itself? Let's understand this why with the help of examples. Scenario 1. Imagine the lockdown happened. We'll discuss the corona lockdown in these both scenarios because it's fresh and right now we are facing that thing. So, in the scenario 1, imagine a lockdown happened and you had a personal savings X amount you had. So you thought, okay, we have to pay the rent and the salary and all those things. So you thought you'll take some money from your personal savings and use it for the expenses for your clinic. You did that. After maybe 2 weeks or something, one of your family member got corona and they were serious and needed immediate medical attention. Now that requires some money too. For that, now you have to depend on the same personal savings and take out the money and use it for that. Now, slowly, as the lockdown increased, as the problems increased, you faced that stress. You started facing that issue that income is not coming from the clinic. I've used my personal savings, and my family also requires some money for the medical expenses and all. You are in a kind of stress situation right now. This is the scenario 1. Now, imagine scenario 2. In scenario 2, same thing happened. Lockdown happened, your clinic is closed, no income from the clinic, but you have an emergency fund which is kept aside only for the clinic expenses, and you started using that emergency fund because this is a kind of emergency and you have started using that fund to meet the expenses of your clinic. Now you have not touched your personal savings or anything. Now some same thing happened in your house. Your family, one of your family member, you maybe your parents or somebody got corona and they needed immediate medical attention. Now this time also you are little relaxed because you have the personal savings, you can use that money for the treatment. In scenario 2, you are little more relaxed than what you were in scenario 1. In scenario 2, you have different funds for the clinic expenses and your home expenses. But in scenario 1, because you didn't have emergency fund, your same account or the same personal fund was supplying for both the clinic and the home. That is the difference. Having an emergency fund gives you a peace of mind, and even if something happens at your home or some emergency comes, because we never know that we can't expect that only one kind of emergency will come at a time. These time, the pandemics, uh, you can't expect. There can be a medical emergency, there can be some business emergency, everything can happen together. So these scenarios can be avoided, or rather can be dealt with better, if you have two different separate accounts and separate savings for the personal and professional. You need not use your personal savings for your meeting your business expenses, and also the vice versa. So that is the benefit, or rather why we require an emergency fund. That is the actual reason. Now let's discuss about the pros and cons of having an emergency fund. Let's discuss the pros first, and then we will be discussing the cons. First process, it gives a sense of security. Having emergency fund makes you feel secure that you have enough fund to sustain your operations in your clinic. Emergencies can be in different forms. It can be sometimes you are not well, you can't go to the clinic for quite a long time, or maybe it is pandemic or something else. And but the best part is you are prepared for any kind of emergencies. You have fund which is kept aside so that the clinic will run smoothly in spite of emergencies. Because always remember one thing, emergencies can come and go, but the life doesn't stop. Whatever kind of emergency comes, you have to pay the bills, you have to pay the salary, you have to pay the rent, everything goes, life goes on, it doesn't stop. So for a sense of security, this emergency fund gives us that. Same thing which we discussed in the scenario 2. That kind of security is created by this emergency fund. Second process, your savings remains untouched. Your personal savings and all, it is not touched when you have some emergency in the clinic. It's always better to have two separate ones, the professional problems and the personal problems. If for some clinic need or some clinic emergency, we take out our personal money and put into that, and sometimes maybe the child may have some issues, or maybe the school we need to pay some fees and all those things, at that time our savings will be less. So it's always better to have an emergency fund which will help us keep these two separate. So that is the second main important pros of having an emergency fund. Our savings always remains untouched. So it is the emergency fund from which we can take out money and use it for the clinic operations. Third thing is we can avoid late fees and those issues. Like if you have an EMI and all, you can't avoid paying that. Maybe we can avoid or request our owner or landlord to pay the rent little late, but we can't do that with the EMIs or the loans and etc. So for those, if we don't pay the credit card bill or the EMI, there will be some late fee applicable. We can avoid all those things when we have some emergency fund. If we have an emergency fund, we can pay those bills, we can pay those EMIs on time, so that we are not paying extra because of the emergency. Nobody will give that liberty, especially the banks and all. They won't give that liberty. So that is the third pros. So the three pros of having an emergency fund is, first, it gives a sense of security. Second, it keeps our savings untouched, intact. That is the second thing. Third thing is it helps us to avoid any late fee payment. Because always remember, whenever some emergency come, life goes on, life doesn't stop. Any payment, any the electricity bill, the gas bill, the internet bill, everything will come and you have to pay for that. We can't avoid those things. We need those things. To run the clinic and everything, we need those things. We need to pay the rent. Everything has to be paid. So if the emergency fund is not there, we'll use it from our personal money. If that is also not there, then we may have to take some loan or something like that, or some financial help from our family. That all problems will come. So rather than that, if we have an emergency fund, we don't have to think or depend on anybody else. can directly use the money from the emergency fund for any of the clinic expenses. So these are the pros of having a emergency fund. Now let's discuss the cons of having an emergency fund. Before proceeding to the cons, kindly comment below and let us know, did you plan the emergency fund? How did you plan it? How was it at the time of pandemic lockdown? How did you cope? And did you use the personal money? How, we would love to know about the scenarios which you had gone through. Kindly give your comment below and let us know your feedback. Your feedbacks are very valuable to us. Cons of emergency fund. The first important thing is lack of returns. Now, what do I mean by that? In my earlier video, we have discussed about having liquid funds, like emergency funds are the liquid funds. That is where in some funds which we keep, where we can take out that money very easily without any loss or anything. Now, there will be a lot of investments which you guys will be doing. Few will be risky investments, few will be long-term investments, few will be having less investment, less kind of returns and all those things. But for the emergency fund, the first criteria is we need that money as it is. Like as if we have put 1 lakh in the emergency fund, that 1 lakh we will require. We don't want to risk that 1 lakh. So you have to put in some investment firm where it is little safe. That is the first thing. Second thing is we have to take it out whenever possible and as early as possible. It should not be something that it will be credited to our account 1 or 2 days later, because maybe it is something because of some medical emergency you need, or some important thing happened, some fire happened in clinic, some kind of emergency where you need that cash, or you need that money today itself or within 1 day itself. So that kind of availability should be there for the emergency fund. So when we look for such kind of funds or such kind of investment where we can take out cash very easily, those funds usually have lower rate of interest than the other firms which may be risky, or which may not be risky, I don't know, but which will have a more rate of interest, which will give you more interest on the money you have deposited. But the liquidity, like the time you can take it out, will be dicey. Like if imagine you have put in some shares during the lockdown period, and that share market at that time, that particular share where you have invested was down, then you can't take out that money because you are in loss right at that point. That should not happen. That is the kind of fund which I'm talking about. Invest in some firm, especially the emergency fund money, in such a firm where you know it is safe and you can take it out at any given point of time, irrespective of how the market is doing or how the economy is or anything. But that fund should not be depleted. It should always increase but should not be depleted. The rate of interest will be less, but that is not what we are looking at. This money is not investment money. This money is the emergency fund money which we have to use for the clinic at the time of emergency. So that is the first cons of having emergency fund, because that money which you are keeping in the emergency fund, we would not be able to invest it in some high paying returns, investment or something like that. We have to be moderate in that. So that is the first cons. Second cons is it limits the investment which you do in your clinic. Building an emergency fund limits how much you can invest in your clinic. That means, let me explain this with the help of example. Imagine you are planning to buy some instrument for your clinic, and for that you may require around 25,000. And you have thought earlier that in the emergency fund you have kept aside every month 5,000 will go into the emergency fund so that you can create that emergency fund. Now, irrespective of whether you want to buy that instrument today or maybe next month, you have to keep that money aside for the emergency, because that fund is something which is equally or rather more important than these investment. Because if some emergency comes, we won't have enough money to tackle that. So creating an emergency fund should be a priority. So when we keep that money aside, from imagine you had 10,000 today in today this month, and you kept aside 5,000, you have only 5,000 excess. You need more to buy that instrument or buy that some machine or something for your clinic, but you don't have that. That is the thing I'm talking about. The investment which we do in our clinic, that is limited when we plan the creating the emergency fund and all those things. When we keep some money aside every month for the emergency fund, the money in hand to invest again in the clinic will be less. So that is a second negative point of having or creating an emergency fund. But this happens only while you create that emergency fund. Once you have created that and it's there, the money, whatever excess is coming, you can invest back in your clinic. But when you're starting your clinic, you need to do a good, or rather 80% or 70% of your profits. It's better you give it into or drop it into the emergency fund, so that you are prepared in case of any kind of emergency which comes. Nowadays we can't predict the pandemic and all. It's the situation is totally unpredictable. So it's always better to have this fund with you, and so that you can use it at the time of need. So rather than investing back in the clinic right now, create that emergency fund first. That would be my recommendation. It had helped me a lot. I hope it helps you too. So today we discussed about why an emergency fund is required, and what are the pros of having an emergency fund, what are the cons of having an emergency fund. I hope you liked today's video. Kindly like, share and subscribe us, and share it with maximum dentists, share it with your juniors who have just started the clinic or are planning to start the clinic, so that they'll get the maximum benefit from it. So thank you so much, guys. And in my future videos, we'll be talking about how to determine how much is required in the emergency fund, because majority of the dentists told us that they had emergency fund, but the money they had planned to keep in the emergency fund, that was far less from what the actual expense was. So that is also important. How much you have in your emergency fund, that is also equally important. So in my future videos, we will be sharing about that and how we can create those things and everything. We will be covering videos on that topic. Send us a hi on this number if you want us to add you to the special broadcast list on WhatsApp. We will be sending you the videos and everything first, and then to the other people. Thank you so much, guys. Until next time, bye.